You're listening to
DNA ID.
brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
all of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1972. An elderly man I'm calling James lived in a home on a residential property in Aurora in King Township, 10 miles north of Toronto, Canada. The house was one of a number of large rural estates that were spread out throughout the hilly and wooded area. At 8:50 in the morning on Thursday, November 30th, James left his home to go to work. His home was on Keele Street. His drive required him to get to Jane Street. So he proceeded out his driveway and took a left on a gravel road called Green Lane, labeled as 16th Side Road on maps. 16th Side Road ran east-west and connected Jane Street and Keele Street in the quiet area. If you're local, this area is very near the King Valley Golf Club, which did not exist in 1972. James turned onto 16th Side Road, and as he approached Jane Street, abruptly braked and stopped. Something was lying in the middle of the road. A young woman lay face down and unmoving on frozen 16th Side Road. James got out of his car and I imagine somewhat gingerly approached the woman. She was nude from the waist down. She lay in a pool of blood surrounding her head, and her head was covered in blood and looked battered and matted. James called the York Regional Police. Officers arrived at the out-of-the-way location 500 yards from the intersection of 16th Side Road and Jane Street. The young woman lay in the gravel roadway as James had described, half-nude, bloody, and lifeless. She was wearing a navy blue wool topcoat, a white blouse, a bra, and tan knee-high boots with zippers. But other than the boots, she was nude from the waist down. Her purse was next to her body, as was a pair of women's underwear. And one of her clenched hands held tightly to a pair of bell-bottom blue jeans, presumably her own. The sight of the half-nude, booted, and bloody young woman was shocking enough, but what really surprised investigators was the blood evidence pointed to her having been murdered right there. Blood spatter and the sheer amount of blood pooled around her head pointed to a possible shooting. Tire tracks in the snow showed the investigators that a car, not James's, had pulled over off the side of the road, stopped, and then backed up and headed back toward the main road. Police blocked the road and commenced their investigation, issuing alerts throughout the Metro Force to look out for a smaller vehicle likely being driven by a man with blood on him and or in his car. Initial headlines in the newspapers blared that a girl had been found shot through the head. That would explain the copious blood. But that was incorrect. Once the girl was examined at her autopsy by Dr. Hans Sepp, she was determined to have died from blunt force trauma to the head. Someone had bludgeoned the back of her skull multiple times, crushing it and lacerating her brain. Her death was very recent. She had been killed within just 1 hour, maximum 2 hours, of when she was found. The homicide victim was checked over for additional wounds or injuries, but none were found other than some abrasions on her hands. These were not termed defensive wounds, but were thought to possibly have been inflicted when she fell to the roadway. A sexual assault kit was conducted. Although there was no visible trauma to the genitals, the circumstances of the girl being found without her pants or underwear gave rise to suspicion of rape. Pubic hair clippings collected by the pathologist exhibited sperm when examined under a microscope. Identification in the purse found next to the body and then by her parents identified the 5'3" tall teenager with long, dark brown wavy hair as 16-year-old Yvonne Leroux. Who was Yvonne? Yvonne Leroux was born on April 17, 1956, to parents Diana and Gerard Leroux. She had 3 siblings, an older, newly married sister named Georgette, a brother named Joey, and another sister named Madeline. The family had lived in the Windsor, Ontario area until Yvonne was about 3 years old when they moved to Toronto. Yvonne had kept in touch with friends and family there and returned to Windsor during the summers and had worked as a babysitter in Essex the summer before she was killed, according to her uncle Paul Leroux of Windsor. At the time of her murder, her 38-year-old mother was a candidate for the Board of Education in North York's Ward 1. She went on to become an accounting supervisor at a hospital in Toronto. Her father, Jerry, was a steelworker at Sidbeck Dosco and was very involved in the Steelworkers Union. Diana later described her daughter to the Windsor Star as an industrious and independent child. She grew into a typical teenager, although one who was beautiful, intelligent, and friendly. When she died, she was a high school student at Emory Collegiate Institute on Weston Road in Toronto. But prior to that time, things had taken a turn for Yvonne when she hit her mid-teenage years. This is all taken from an article in the Vaughan Citizen, which interviewed Diana Leroux in depth. Diana and Gerard, known as Jerry, are no longer alive, so I've had to rely for many details about Yvonne from reporting on her case and interviews with her family. Diana told the Citizen that everything was fine until July 1st, 1971, when Yvonne was 15 years old. On that day, Yvonne took her brother Joey to a community fireworks celebration. There, she ran into a male acquaintance, and she preferred to hang out with him than her younger brother, so she got into this young man's car with him as he claimed to be heading to pick up 3 friends. Joey found his way home by 9 p.m., but Yvonne did not come home until after 11. She was crying and upset and told her mom she'd been gang raped by the guys she was with. According to the Vaughan Citizen, quote, police reports show charges were laid but eventually withdrawn in December 1971. The rape was the beginning of an abrupt downward spiral for Yvonne. Her self-esteem plummeted and she struggled with PTSD. Soon after it happened, she ran away from home, taking with her the dog she'd rescued as a puppy and raised. Her parents could not find her, despite calling all her friends and her mom, Diana, spending days on end driving the streets of Toronto looking for her daughter. She finally heard from an extended family member that Yvonne had been sighted in the Windsor area. I want to state here that it's totally unclear exactly what the timeline is for this entire period of Yvonne's life, between when she left home and when she finally returned home to the family's Topeka Drive home in Weston, around February 1972, 9 months after she'd left. She wouldn't tell her mother where she'd been or with whom, but she intimated she'd been indoctrinated into a motorcycle gang. She showed her mom 3 dots that appeared to be tattooed on the webbing of both hands between the thumb and pointer fingers. These dots are not discernible in the autopsy photos, so it's unclear if they really were tattoos or perhaps Yvonne had drawn them herself. The dots were the mark of a gang, she said. This from the Vaughan Citizen. She was under the thumb of that gang, Diana added. She wouldn't tell me the name of the gang. She said, I'm putting you in danger if I tell you too much. Yvonne told Diana that she couldn't say more, but that through a friend, the gang had demanded that she start running drugs for them, and she'd refused. Now she was scared. She felt the gang was going to come after her and get revenge. People don't just walk away from gangsters' demands, especially 16-year-old girls. Yvonne's father, Jerry, told the Sudbury Star that his daughter got mixed up with a gang and got in too deep. Quote, she tried to get away from them. She tried to get out of the gang and didn't want to get our family involved in the gang. Yvonne was genuinely afraid that the drug-pushing biker gang was out to get her. Diana insisted on reporting all this, and for a short time, a Toronto police detail stationed themselves outside the Leroux home. Diana drove her daughter everywhere. She was afraid to go out. Diana told the Vaughan Citizen that one detective told her, if it was my daughter, I wouldn't let her out of my sight. Nothing happened with the gang, although the family was spooked and Diana even felt that someone was watching them. Yvonne wanted to be independent, and after resurfacing, she didn't want to stay living at home. For a time, she lived in a rented room at a house on Grenadine Road, 3 blocks from her parents. She paid the rent via a weekly welfare check of $28. She also stayed in the basement apartment of a local married couple, the Grecks. I think it's possible that Yvonne's parents were okay with this because Yvonne had returned home addicted to drugs. She told a friend that she had tried pretty much everything. I suspect her parents didn't want Yvonne around her younger siblings. It seems, though, that her parents and counselors were able to help her overcome her addiction, and she'd gotten off the drugs in the spring of 1972 and had recently, although some reports say April, moved back into the family home. Piecing her life back together, Yvonne went back to school at Emory Collegiate and worked small jobs, such as the one she held at Garrett Manufacturing in Rexdale, although she was underage and so used the alias Linda Jessup to get the factory job. She was also enrolled in a teen-focused drug rehab program called Youth Clinical Services, administered by York Finch General Hospital and Westview Centennial Secondary School. She was doing very well. In fact, her mother Diana later told the Willowdale Mirror that Yvonne had talked about writing down all her experiences with her drug addiction in order to, quote, be able to stop someone else from making the same mistakes. She wanted to show how innocent people can get into dangers when they think they're a little older and more knowledgeable than they really are. On the night of November 29th, Yvonne had left the house to attend one of the counseling sessions she regularly went to. The next morning, Diana, who was worried sick because Yvonne had not come home the previous night, was notified that a body had been found. Jerry was at his union meeting when he got the call from Diana. The couple was asked to come to the Lombard Street morgue to identify their daughter's body. Even with the trauma to her head, there was no doubt that it was their daughter who lay on the table. Despite surmounting so many obstacles and setting herself back on the right pathway, Yvonne had been victimized again, and this time she couldn't fix it. Funeral services were held at Ward Funeral Home, and Yvonne was buried at Beechwood Cemetery. All 16 detectives on the York Regional Police were assigned to the Yvonne Leroux case. At the crime scene on 16th Side Road, they found tire tracks in the less than 1 inch of snow on the ground. The tracks showed that a vehicle had entered the area, stopped, backed up, and turned around before driving out. Extensive analysis of the tire tracks didn't lead to any useful information about the type of vehicle driven by Yvonne's killer. As Detective Sergeant Jonathan Nauman of the York Police Cold Case Unit explained it to me, the tire track measuring and analysis capabilities of the police in 1972 were limited by their fairly crude instruments and inexact measuring capabilities. Even being 1/4 inch off in the measurements of the tire width or wheelbase could throw the entire analysis off. In short, they didn't get anywhere with the tire tracks, and no one had seen a car driving in the area that morning. Police also found a very distinctive shoe print in the snow, not made by Yvonne's boots. The shoe was clearly a man's boot or shoe measuring at about 15 inches long with a hard U-shaped heel and patterned sole. It very well could have been a boot. Police officers fanned out in the area where Yvonne was found, looking in the woods and brush surrounding the lane for the murder weapon, a hard, blunt object that likely had hair and blood on it. 10 Army officers from Toronto were brought in to use metal detectors to pore over the road and the nearby woods in a quest for the murder weapon. Although they kept their eyes out for anything and any signs of blood, they were looking for something along the lines of a tire iron, pipe, or baseball bat. These were all consistent with whatever item inflicted the wounds on Yvonne's skull. They found nothing. To this day, the exact nature of the murder weapon remains unknown. Police canvassers located a witness who helped confirm the police theory that Yvonne had been killed on the roadway just a short time before James found her. A paper delivery driver drove down the street at 5:45 a.m., and Yvonne's body was not there. James left for work at 8:50, and there she was. She'd been killed there during that 3-hour window, although police believed that the time of death was much closer to 8:50. Sunrise was at 7:30 a.m., and if the pathologist was correct and Yvonne had just been killed when she was found, the slaying took place in public in daylight. Police issued statements to the press, hoping to drum up some tips. They alerted the public that Yvonne had been killed by very forceful blows to the head and, quote, whoever did this had a lot of blood on them. They also believed that Yvonne had been dumped in the dirt road by a vehicle that had had to turn around and head back out toward Jane Street. Tire tracks in the snow showed this trajectory very clearly. They noted that at the time they believed she was being killed on 16th Side Road, Children were being dropped off by parents at Sacred Heart Secondary School nearby. There was also a busy early morning school bus stop right in the area. They felt strongly that someone must have seen a car emerging from the isolated dirt road at that time of day, but they never found one. Police had no suspect, but they quickly felt confident that they had a general idea of what had happened. York Regional Police Chief Inspector Wally Harkness jumped to some conclusions in a Canadian press article titled "Girl's Murder Linked to Drugs." He told the publication, "It's a drug-oriented thing. She's been in the drug game and mixed up with drug people," end quote. He made sure to clarify that there was no evidence that Yvonne was currently doing drugs. And in fact, her tox screen at her autopsy showed no signs of drugs in her system. Quote, "But she's been apparently in fear of her life because of her involvement in drugs. She talked to the Metropolitan Toronto Police Drug Squad in August, and apparently she'd been threatened. She named certain persons she was concerned about," end quote. Okay, we can agree that these kind of statements about a victim would never happen now. Basically, Harkness was saying she was in fear because she was involved with drugs and with other people who were involved in drugs, and she got killed because of it. He assumed Yvonne was a victim of drug violence because months earlier, she and her mom reported that she'd been threatened because she refused to be a drug courier, and as a result, she had requested protection from a drug gang. Police assumed whoever had threatened her had finally followed through after Yvonne refused to play ball. Metro Police immediately focused on trying to figure out who had been threatening Yvonne. Police started putting together a timeline of Yvonne's last known movements. Her mother told detectives that her daughter left home on Wednesday night to go to her counseling session at the treatment center. Diana told the Toronto Star, quote, "She had just come back home to live with us. I had just picked her up at school that day and drove her home." Detectives verified that that night, Yvonne was seen at the clinic located behind York Finch General Hospital at Jane Street and Finch Avenue, and was last seen leaving there at 10:00 p.m. There are some inconsistencies about how Yvonne intended to get home from the counseling session. Diana later told several publications that she drove to the hospital to pick Yvonne up as planned, but was told by an attendant that Yvonne had left just minutes earlier. But according to the Vaughan Citizen, quote, "The two detectives working the case, Detective Bill Cordis and Detective Bob Athwal, say their files show that Yvonne was to get a ride with a young male friend from the counseling session, but decided at the last minute not to," end quote. Detectives knew that was the key, Yvonne leaving the counseling session, had she met up with someone. Witnesses in the area of the counseling office saw Yvonne walking away from the area after the meeting. She was seen on foot in the area of Oakdale Road and Finch Avenue West in Toronto. She was alone. No one saw her getting into a vehicle or in the company of anyone else. Whether or not Diana's recall was accurate, the Leroux expected Yvonne to return home that night after walking the approximately 3 miles back to their home. She never arrived. Yvonne's mom reported that the teen had left home wearing a navy blue wool coat, a white shirt, jeans, a necklace, and thigh-high tan boots with zippers. She was carrying a brown purse. All of these items were found on or with her body. She had not changed out of the clothing she'd been wearing when she left her parents' house, confirming that she had been picked up that night. But no one knew where Yvonne had been for the nearly 11 hours between the time she was last seen leaving the counseling session and 8:50 the next morning when her body was found, 24 kilometers, about 20 miles from home. And notice the time here. Again, the coroner put the time of Yvonne's death at the earliest at 6:50 a.m. As I said earlier, sunrise in late November in this area was at 7:30. Whoever had killed Yvonne in the road had kept her alive all night and had been awfully brazen, violently killing her in the light of dawn or even daytime on a weekday when people heading out to work or school were out and about. It pointed to an unplanned, compulsive slaying. Whoever bludgeoned Yvonne and left her in the road was not fearful of being caught. Police interviewed Yvonne's schoolmates and learned that she had very few close friends, but she did have a boyfriend, an older guy named Donald R. Donald had met Yvonne when he and his brother picked her up hitchhiking at the end of October 1972. They lived in the same neighborhood. I don't have a lot of information on Donald. I'm not even sure how police learned about him, whether Yvonne's parents knew about him or whether they tracked him down as one of the names in Yvonne's address book that police collected and methodically vetted the names from. I was told that Donald was cooperative and he gave numerous statements to police. Yet he was the number one suspect in Yvonne's murder because he had just started dating her a month earlier. They were sexually active, and everyone agreed that Yvonne would definitely have gotten into a vehicle with Donald. Donald denied killing Yvonne and cited an alibi, which police looked into and apparently verified. Donald gave a saliva sample which was used for blood typing analysis back in 1972, although I don't know exactly what testing was done or what the results were. We'll come back to Donald a little later. Police learned about another male friend of Yvonne's, someone her own age named Robert. Yvonne and Robert were apparently also seeing each other. After her murder, when police tracked down and interviewed Robert, he admitted the two were involved. It's unclear to me whether Robert and Donald knew about each other and whether there were any jealousy issues. Robert was Yvonne's friend prior to becoming involved with her, so I suspect he knew about Donald. This love triangle, of course, kept police busy sorting out the relationships, who knew what, and whether anyone was jealous enough to have killed Yvonne. Like Donald, Robert denied killing Yvonne, and he gave a saliva sample. And it turned out he had an alibi that meant he could not have been the person who killed her. York detectives looked into everyone at Yvonne's school who was friendly with her, as I said, not many. Fellow employees at her workplace, other attendees at the counseling facility, neighbors, and so on. Remember that I said Yvonne had often returned to Windsor, where she had spent her early childhood. She had extended family and friends, and she babysat for her family the previous summer. Detective Sergeant Bill Hay and Detective Brian Cousineau of the York Regional Police traveled to Windsor to interview witnesses who knew Yvonne. They were also looking to track down the drug/gang angle, which had Yvonne speaking in whispers about threats from unnamed persons and which seemed like a fantastic lead. But her parents, having been, air quote, protected by Yvonne, were vague on the details, and police came to learn that Yvonne did not know precisely who was threatening her. And in Windsor, the whole sordid tale emerged as police delved into Yvonne's connections there. Police followed the drug and gang trail in Windsor back to an older Windsor man I'm calling Roger. Remember that Yvonne had told her parents that some drug dealers were threatening her. She left behind a letter among her things, and the letter named this man Roger as likely being involved if anything were ever to happen to her. According to Yvonne, Roger had been named as a higher-up in a drug trafficking organization and had dangerous associates and so on. Imagine investigating a murder and finding this clue left behind by the victim herself. No wonder police felt so confident at first that the drug angle was what had gotten Yvonne killed. She said so herself. York investigators traveled to Windsor and sat down to interrogate this guy Roger, who was way older than Yvonne. And under questioning, Roger's facade crumbled. He wasn't a big, powerful drug dealer with biker gang connections. He was a married man who had been sleeping with Yvonne. He concocted the whole drug trafficking kingpin story to both impress and scare Yvonne, although I think he really was involved with drugs. From what I can gather, he told her that he was being targeted and gang members were threatening him and also wanted her to be a drug mule, and that he told them no and they were angry and she had to promise not to tell anyone anything, including that she even knew him. The whole thing was a ruse by Roger to ensure that the 16-year-old girl he had seduced was living in fear and wouldn't tell anyone about their relationship because he didn't want his wife to find out. I really, really hope that she did and left him for being a giant D-bag and statutory rapist. Yvonne believed this whole elaborate lie told to her by Roger and eventually told her parents, leading to the police report. But Roger's confession that it was all made up was a hard stop to the drug/gang angle. What had seemed like a fail-safe lead, destined to lead right to some hardened gang killer who had taken out Yvonne out of vengeance or double-crossing, evaporated in a puff of smoke. And Roger had an alibi for the time of the murder, so even though he clearly had motive to keep Yvonne quiet, he didn't do it. They had nothing. By December 6th, Inspector Wally Harkness, the one who had jumped to the conclusion that Yvonne was killed because of drug connections, had tempered his comments, telling the Willowdale Mirror, quote, "I think he could be somebody who knew her," end quote. He told the paper that more than 7 men had been eliminated so far. I assume these were people like James, the man who found Yvonne, who had to be looked at, Roger, the lying lover, Yvonne's dad, the male half of the married couple she lived with, the Grecks, and so on. My understanding is that both Robert and Donald stayed on the list for now. By the end of January, a reward in the amount of $2,500 was approved by the York Regional Board of Commissioners of Police to be paid to anyone who provided information leading to the arrest of those responsible for Yvonne's death. Police were frustrated that nothing concrete had come up in the investigation, as York Deputy Police Chief Robert Hood put it. Diana, Yvonne's mother, had already accepted that her daughter's murder might have been random. She wrote a letter to the editor of the Toronto Star that was published in June of 1973. In it, she addressed a contemporary controversy in Canada about hitchhiking and whether or not it should be a recommended form of transportation for young people traveling the country. She argued vehemently that hitchhiking was a dangerous practice. Her letter said, quote, "It is hard enough in this day and age raising children to be happy and well without being hampered by officials who tell them it's all right to do something that their parents have warned them is dangerous and wrong." Yvonne, too, thought she was quite mature and intelligent and capable of handling any situation that might come along. She found out different and went through her own private hell because of it. Last November, she stated that she finally understood why her parents had been so against it, and she hoped she might be able to save other teenagers from the pitfalls she encountered. A few days later, she took one more chance, and this time fatal. She was buried in a closed coffin 6 months ago after being raped and brutally beaten almost beyond recognition on a lonely road north of Kings City. End quote. By April 1974, the reward had expired without ever being collected. But the York Regional Police wanted the public to know that they were still working the case and would never close the file on it. They were looking for clues concerning what happened to Yvonne and requested tips from the public. Because Yvonne was killed in York, the investigation was spearheaded by the York Regional Police's Chief Homicide Inspector Robert McCausland. He was still looking for leads on the case in 1980. Year after year thereafter, detectives assigned to the case kept an eye out for similar cases, offenders who fit the bill, and tips called in. But nothing of significance happened on the case until 2001. That year, York Regional Police announced that they had reopened investigations into 17 unsolved murders. The oldest of these, at nearly 30 years old, was Yvonne's case. 2 detectives, Randy Martin and Detective Constable Timothy Gore, staffed the cold case squad. They had been tasked with figuring out which cases might have DNA available. They submitted samples of physical evidence in Yvonne's case, and boy did this bear fruit. On the underwear and jeans found at the scene was a consistent male DNA profile derived from seminal fluid on those garments. On Yvonne's blue coat was another seminal fluid stain, yielding a DNA profile not consistent with the one on the jeans and the underwear. On the pubic hair cuttings taken at Yvonne's autopsy was seminal fluid from yet a third male contributor. DNA from 3 men was on items found at the crime scene or on Yvonne's person. Believe it or not, police still had in evidence usable saliva samples collected from 2 men who had been looked at in the early investigation, Robert and Donald. You'll recall Donald was Yvonne's older boyfriend and Robert was the peer she was seeing on the side. The saliva samples had been collected when the crime first happened, and now they were tested for DNA. The nearly 30-year-old spit samples yielded DNA profiles for each man. The semen on the underwear and jeans came from Donald. The semen on the coat came from Robert. The semen on the pubic hair trimmings remained unidentified. Of course, since there was semen from only one man on her pubic hair and Yvonne had been found dead with no underwear on, it could be presumed that that seminal fluid sample was left there by Yvonne's killer. The STR DNA profile from the pubic hair trimmings was entered into the Canadian National DNA Databank in late 2001 or early 2002. There were no hits. But Yvonne's case dated back to 1972, and the databank wasn't established until July 2000. There was nearly a quarter century during which Yvonne's killer could have been reoffending undetected. In 2014, there was a big push to solve Yvonne's case. The Regional Municipality of York Police Services Board decided to offer a $50,000 reward for information. It would remain available for a year until March of 2015. Additional items found at this crime scene were submitted to the Center of Forensic Sciences for updated DNA testing at this time as well, but no new data was obtained from that analysis. In connection with the publicity about their reward, the case got renewed attention. At a press conference, York homicide detective Joseph Amato Gauci said, quote, "At the end of the day, Her family and friends deserve some closure and answers. As time goes by, unfortunately, people start dying off, even possible perpetrators. With the advances in forensic technology, we hope to reach a point where we can get some answers, and with the progression of time, people who knew something or know something would be inclined to come forward now, end quote. Yvonne's mother, Diana, told the Windsor Star, quote, "More than half my life I've been waiting for something to be done. I just hope something comes from this. Nothing is going to bring her back, but I'd like to see her get justice," end quote. Diana told the paper she was frustrated because she'd written the police letter after letter over the years and never got much response. She felt that the cold case detectives were shuffled around and none of them were on the case long enough to actually sink their teeth into it. It was hoped that this would now change. A York Regional Police media release announcing the reward said, quote, "Despite the passage of time, investigators in our homicide unit remain actively committed to solving this case. With the advent of new forensic technology and input from members of the public, investigators are hopeful they will be able to move the investigation forward." Around the time of this release, Yvonne's dad, Jerry, gave an interview to the Sudbury Star. He was still so broken over his little girl's horrific, unsolved death. Jerry said if he could meet the man who killed his daughter, he would ask him, "What kind of heart do you have?" Jerry was a big supporter of the reward being offered by police, saying, quote, "I can't thank the detective enough for what he's doing on my behalf." York Regional Police Detective Sergeant Jim Kilby told the CBC Canada in 2014 that it was hard to imagine what Yvonne's family had gone through over those years. He was aware that their pain had never gone away, and that solving the case might just ease that ever so slightly. Quote, "We are in contact with the family on a regular basis, and like all of these cases, we feel their pain when these anniversary dates approach," he said. The reward went unclaimed and expired. In March of 2016, police renewed the $50,000 reward for information. By this time, 2016, York Regional Police Detective Rosa Sposata was on the case. Her theory was that Yvonne had decided to hitchhike home on that cold winter night in 1972, and that decision had sealed her fate. 2017 was the 45th anniversary of the murder. Once again, Diana and Jerry spoke about their anguish. Diana told the Vaughan Citizen, quote, "I've spent half my life missing my daughter. It bugs me when people talk about closure. There's no closure. Nothing brings someone back." As for whether the case will ever be solved, Diana doubts it. People protect each other's backs, she said. As for Jerry, he said it feels as though he's been left in limbo since the day of her death. "I will never get over it," he said. "It feels like you're left hanging out in the open air. You're lost, and no one is willing to help," unquote. In 2021, Detective Sergeant Jonathan Nauman took up the Yvonne Leroux case with an eye toward conducting an investigative genetic genealogy investigation. He knew there was a complete male STR DNA profile and evidence from the sexual assault kit, and that profile was in the Canadian DNA databank and had never gotten a hit. He decided it was worthwhile to run the profile through the U.S. system, just in case the offender had crossed the border and committed crimes that qualified him for entry into CODIS. We learned about how this all works when we discussed the Calvary Girls case, in which the killer turned out to be U.S. citizen Gary Sweary. The Canadian authorities used Interpol to facilitate a search of the NDIS, the U.S. National DNA Database, on a one-time basis. This was done in 2021, and disappointingly, there were no hits to the U.S. system either. The next step was genealogy. Detective Sergeant Nauman found that there was still ample physical evidence on hand, the pubic hair trimmings collected at Yvonne's autopsy that had yielded a male STR DNA profile 20 years earlier. He submitted the samples to Gene by Gene for SNP preparation, and a suitable profile was obtained. In 2022, York police uploaded it to Family Tree DNA and were pleasantly surprised to find a high match there. Very high. This initial match shared 1,800 centimorgans of autosomal DNA with the suspect, possibly a half-sibling, an uncle or aunt, a grandparent, or a niece or nephew of the suspect. But there was a problem. Detective Sergeant Nauman could not link this person to any of the other matches. Her documentation, public records about her name and family, did not align with the familial relationships he could see in Family Tree DNA. She was adopted, and they needed more data. That same year, in 2022, Toronto Police Services received a grant from Ontario's Ministry of the Solicitor General to conduct IgG analysis in cold cases. They created an in-house genealogy team tasked with taking on cold cases for both Toronto and Ontario Police Services. This is the first in-house genetic genealogy team in Canada. It is staffed by numerous genealogists and one detective constable, James Atkinson. Because of work the York Police had done on a prior case with GEDmatch, they had earned a free upload to that database. York Police decided to utilize that free upload in Yvonne's case, and on January 18, 2023, submitted the SNP profile to the Toronto Police Services in-house genealogy team, the holder of the GEDmatch credit, on their behalf. Yvonne's case was the oldest taken up by the genealogy team as of that date. York Police expected that the genealogist, Katie Crossman, would effect the upload to GEDmatch and provide the information she found there to Detective Sergeant Nauman, but instead, she solved it. Ms. Crossman uploaded the SNP profile to GEDmatch. She also had access to the family tree DNA results, where she saw the massive initial match that York investigators had noted, 1,800 centimorgans. She thought, well, this'll be easy. Further, the top match had an uncommon name, which was easy to research. Despite that, there were 2 women with the exact same name in the area. The genealogist would have to build out the trees of both women. She did so, but was not able to connect the known relatives of the top match to any other matches, of which they had a significant number. She knew they must all be related to the suspect, but could not figure out how the top match fit in. She came to the same conclusion Detective Sergeant Nauman had reached. The top match was adopted. Rather than trying to pierce the adoption, knowing that would be an onerous and time-consuming, if not impossible, task, the genealogist decided to focus on several other matches. She moved on to lower matches, one in the high 200s, another around 200, and the rest double digits. Some of the names happened to have been mapped out already in a massive tree the Toronto Police Services genealogy team had been working on in another very complex case. So Yvonne's case started to come together quickly. Ms. Crossman found genetic relatives of the suspect on both sides of the suspect's family tree, one named Steep and the other named Cantillon. She had quite a few matches to work with, second, third, fourth, and fifth cousins. A second cousin on the Cantillon side pointed to this being the suspect's paternal line, and the high 200 centimorgans match appeared to be a half first cousin once removed on the maternal line. This was all supported by lesser matches. All these genetic relatives traced back to most recent common ancestors Martha Steep, born in 1859, and Albert Cantillon, born in 1850, who may have met when they both served as officers of the Tipperary Rose Lodge in Huron in 1878. Ms. Crossman knew they were looking for someone connected to the Cantillon family, possibly a great-grandson of the Steep and Cantillon union. The descendants of this union did not involve massive families or complex situations such as non-paternal events. By the 21st of January, the genealogist suspected that she had identified the possible suspect as being one of the 2 sons of Leonard Cantillon, born 1923, and his wife, Dorothy Goodwin. Both sons were the great-grandchildren of Martha Steep and Albert Cantillon. The genealogy team reported the names of the 2 brothers to the York Police, and Detective Sergeant Nauman began an investigation into the Cantillon brothers. The older son, whose first initial was B, was born in 1946. The younger son, whose first initial was G, was born in 1955. G was alive and still living in the area, but he would have been kind of young to so viciously kill Yvonne. He was just 17 in 1972. Still, we've seen younger killers, so that didn't rule him out. G appeared to have only a very minor criminal record from many years earlier. As for B, they couldn't find him. I will say that his name caused some confusion to the researchers, who found many records relating to a doctor with the same name in the same area in the same time frame, who was a coroner. For a time, they thought they had a killer coroner on their hands. That sounds like an awesome podcast episode. They built out Dr. Cantillon's tree and showed that his pedigree ruled him out from being the killer, although he was a distant cousin of the killer. The name of the other brother, G. Cantillon, was the name of a police officer who appeared in the media quite a bit at the time. Here we go again. Was the killer a member of law enforcement? But no, again, this was the wrong G. Cantillon. They knew that these public figures were not the brothers they were looking for, but they couldn't find much on the suspect Cantillons. They couldn't even tell if B was still alive. Detective Sergeant Nauman told me that he checked with the Office of the Chief Coroner of Ontario, which maintained records of all deaths in the region, and the name B. Cantillon was there, and he quickly got a whole lot more interesting. He had taken his own life 19 months after Yvonne was slain. B. Cantillon had been cremated. There was only one thing left to do to determine which one, B or G, was Yvonne's killer. They started surveilling G, who still lived in the area, and followed him as he did errands and some shopping at a local shopping plaza. They watched him as he smoked a cigarette outside a commercial establishment and dropped a nice, fresh cigarette butt for them to scoop up. Testing on the butt cleared one brother and implicated the other. The DNA on the cigarette butt did not match the DNA on the pubic hair clippings, but it showed that the person whose DNA was on the butt shared DNA with the contributor of the sample DNA consistent with being a full sibling. The killer was the dead brother, Bruce Charles Cantillon. York police held a press conference announcing the closure of the Yvonne Leroux case. Unfortunately, her parents were no longer alive to see it. Diana had died in 2022 and Jerry the following year. York Regional Police Deputy Chief of Investigations Alvaro Almeida addressed the assembled media with a large photo of Yvonne on display. He announced that after 51 years, York police had solved the cruel and ruthless murder of Yvonne. Quote, "Despite the sad circumstances of Yvonne's death, I am gratified to be able to deliver her family this resolution, if not closure," Almeida said. Quote, "I can't imagine how difficult it must have been, living all those years, with such a loss and not knowing all this time who is responsible." Almeida thanked everyone who worked on the case, which he called a true collaboration. Detective Sergeant Nauman addressed the assembled media as well. He said, quote, "I am pleased to be here today to provide our community and the media with an update on a 50-year-old homicide that up until recently remained unsolved," end quote. Nauman laid out the facts of Yvonne's case and told the crowd that Yvonne's murder was totally unrelated to outlaw bikers and the illicit drug trade, despite the police theories and subsequent reporting at the time that had colored the public perception of the crime. Her killer was Bruce Charles Cantillon, who was 26 years old in 1972 and had a record of crimes against women. He died in 1974, but if he were alive today, he'd be facing a charge of murder, said Detective Sergeant Nauman. Quote, "We owe our gratitude to the Leroux family for its ongoing support in very difficult circumstances. Also, as the deputy mentioned, we could not have achieved this result without the help of our law enforcement partners, especially the Toronto Police Homicide Cold Case Unit. Thanks as well to the witnesses and our community and to the media for keeping Yvonne's story in the public eye as best it could. The diligence and dedication of the investigators who worked this case over the last 50 years has finally paid off. The technological advances have opened up new investigative avenues, and we are proud that York Regional Police is at the forefront of leveraging these technologies. We wanted to share with our community at large that Yvonne's murder has been solved and to reassure other homicide victim families that York Regional Police won't stop searching for answers." Okay, so what do we know about Bruce Charles Cantillon? The answer is not a lot. He was born on an unknown date in 1946 to parents Leonard and Dorothy. His brother G was born in 1955. I found a newspaper blurb and a photo of a bunch of 8th graders, including Bruce Cantillon, celebrating their graduation from 8th grade at Bruce Street Public School in 1960. His mainstream behavior seems to have come to an end shortly after that, although police have no witnesses who have been able to furnish them with solid information. By the time police learned his name, Cantillon had been dead for 50 years. Cantillon's parents are also both deceased, and his brother G was 9 years younger than he, with limited recall. Once the York police knew that G. Cantillon was not the killer of Yvonne, they approached him and he agreed to talk to them. No, they did not tell him that they had grabbed and tested a sample of his DNA. As I said, G did not remember much about his older brother who had died a half-century ago. Detective Sergeant Nauman said that G was cooperative and that it was difficult for him to learn that his brother had done something so horrific. However, it was not entirely a surprise. Here's why. Bruce Charles Cantillon was a multiple violent sex offender. Tracking down information regarding Cantillon's record was no easy feat. His crimes dated back to the 1960s. All records had been purged. Even Toronto Police Services had no records relating to Cantillon from that time frame. But Detective Sergeant Nauman requested records from the Ontario Archives for Governmental Records, which gave a history of Cantillon's mental health records, including details of his crimes in the early 1960s. A series of assaults on women in Toronto had begun on December 26, 1962. Women walking down the street were essentially hit over the head and possibly sexually assaulted. It's really unclear from the reporting. These attacks happened on December 26th, December 27th, and January 8th, 1963. No one knew who was responsible. Then on January 10th, 1963, in an incident that was not recognized at the time to be related, a car was stolen and the driver possibly deliberately struck and injured a pedestrian on Mason Boulevard. The injured party was 55-year-old handyman Joseph Dobler. Dobler suffered a broken hip, a broken leg, and a concussion. The car was found abandoned 2 blocks away. Then on January 11th, a 16-year-old girl was beaten and sexually assaulted on Wilson Avenue near the Highway 401 overpass. She required 8 stitches to close the wound in her scalp. The attack was believed to have been carried out by the same perpetrator as the earlier assaults on women. Police were so eager to put a stop to these attacks that they established a squad consisting of the entire North York Detective Force and other patrol officers to patrol the city. And their efforts paid off. On January 12th, the day after the 16-year-old girl was beaten and raped, Detective Edward Blakely and PC Carl Breaker saw a young man approaching a woman from behind as she walked along Bannockburn Avenue. He was carrying a length of twisted steel bar. They closed in and made the arrest, stopping a likely brutal assault. The perpetrator turned out to be 16-year-old Bruce Charles Cantillon of Avenue Road. Charges levied against Cantillon were auto theft, criminal negligence causing bodily harm, failure to remain at the scene of an accident, wounding, indecent assault, possessing an offensive weapon, and 3 counts of assault causing bodily harm. In the wake of this incident, from what police can determine from the very scant 1963 records, Cantillon was diverted from the criminal justice system into mental health services. It's unclear whether he was formally found to be not criminally responsible by reason of mental disorder after legal proceedings, or whether he was relegated to the mental health system before it even got to that point. Cantillon spent 6 years at the Mental Health Care Center Penetanguishene, a 300-bed facility 150 kilometers north of Toronto, which was the only facility with a high-security forensic hospital for patients in the justice system. Cantillon was released in 1969. After that, he was in and out of voluntary mental health facilities in the Toronto area, but generally not for long-term stays. It's kind of shocking that he avoided any prison time for all these attacks on women, and then was deemed rehabilitated and released 6 years later, with no conditions. There are no records of police contact with Cantillon after this time, but now we know that 3 years after his release in 1972, he possibly raped and then definitely bludgeoned Yvonne to death with a hard object. The murder weapon was never located, and all these years later, police have not been able to find anyone who remembers Cantillon appearing with blood on him, any tools going missing, or his vehicle being bloodied inside. We know why Bruce Cantillon did not have a DNA profile in the Canadian National DNA Databank. He died in 1974. The databank was first online in 2000. And his crimes, the sexual assaults and bludgeonings, occurred in the 1960s, so no DNA was ever collected from him. His criminal acts took place before DNA was even imagined. Nonetheless, I asked Detective Sergeant Nauman if Cantillon should have been looked at back in 1972. He had been incarcerated for hitting teenage girls and young women over the heads with pipes and sexually assaulting them. But those crimes took place almost 10 years before Yvonne's murder. Cantillon had been released 3 years before the slaying. There was no way police would have made the connection. But they almost did. Detective Sergeant Nauman told me that he found something interesting in the case file. Robert, the friend of Yvonne's who was sort of involved with her, told the interviewing detectives about one incident. He was over at Yvonne's apartment hanging out, and there was a knock at the door. She opened it, and there was an older guy there who said he was stopping by to visit with her. Because Robert was there, she declined. The visitor was upset that Yvonne had another guy over and left angrily. Yvonne told Robert that this guy's name was Bruce. The case file contains a scrap of paper with 1972 detectives' scribbled notes saying, "Find out phone number for Bruce's boyfriend." As you can tell, this Bruce guy was not listed in Yvonne's address book. The only way police learned the name Bruce was because Robert mentioned it. There's no indication that the original detectives were ever able to figure out who Bruce was, how Yvonne knew him, or where they'd met. If they had, his records certainly would have raised red flags. But Detective Sergeant Nauman believes that this was very likely Bruce Cantillon. Unfortunately, we have no idea. Either Robert couldn't recall or the original investigators didn't record when exactly this kerfuffle with the visitor Bruce took place. Based on the general timeline we know about Yvonne, it was sometime between April and November 1972, and I'm guessing it was toward the latter end of that. So the working theory at this time is that Bruce Cantillon was upset and possibly jealous, and then, on November 29th, Yvonne set out to walk home or to hitch a ride home from her counseling session. Or perhaps Bruce was the guy the detective's notes had referenced she was supposed to get a ride from. Cantillon did have access to a vehicle at this time, according to people detectives interviewed. The Ministry of Transportation has purged all records, so we can't confirm what the car was or that it was registered to Cantillon, but we know that Yvonne was transported in a car, so he must have been driving one. Bruce Cantillon was not involved in the counseling session that Yvonne was attending, but he and Yvonne could have made arrangements for him to drive her home, or he could have just happened by as she was walking. We will never know. Another thing we will never know is where Cantillon and Yvonne were from the time he picked her up at 10 p.m.-ish to the time he left her in the middle of 16th Side Road close to 8:50 a.m. That's 11 hours unaccounted for. Where were they? I asked whether Cantillon had his own place, somewhere he could take Yvonne. The short answer is we just don't know. Cantillon did get his own apartment sometime around this time, but we don't know when exactly. It's really hard to figure out what exactly happened in this case. Yvonne didn't have bruises or marks on her body indicating a physical altercation. She wasn't punched or tied up, it doesn't appear. Yes, she was in a vehicle with Cantillon and had no pants on, and semen was found in her pubic area. Something happened in that car. She didn't walk out of an apartment with no pants on. After whatever happened, she was so eager to get out of the car that she put her boots on, grabbed her pants and underwear, and presumably jumped out of the car, which was pulled over on 16th Side Road. Detective Nauman told me it's his impression that Yvonne got out of the car unhurt, although again, I think we can presume something that traumatized her happened in that vehicle. As she was walking or running away, we don't know which, she was hit on the head from behind and went down scraping her hands. Cantillon hit her again, crushing her skull and killing her. He threw the unknown weapon back into his car, did a 3-point turn, leaving tracks in the snow, and drove off. Of course, I asked Detective Sergeant Nauman whether the Cantillons had any connection to the area where Yvonne was killed, 24 kilometers north of where she was last seen. The answer was no. We have no idea how he selected the location where Yvonne was killed or why. It's worth emphasizing here that Bruce Cantillon had no connections whatsoever to any biker gangs or drug traffickers. Those leads diverted the attention of police investigating Yvonne's slaying, but turned out to be the ultimate red herring. In the end, she was simply killed by someone she knew, someone whom, no doubt, she had no idea had a history of violent sexual offenses against women. Yvonne overcame so much and at the tender age of 16 had righted herself and set herself on a path to a better life. That was all taken away from her by a truly depraved and monstrous man who soon ended his own life as well. I'd neglected to tell you how Bruce Cantillon died. Detective Sergeant Nauman was able to obtain 2 Toronto police records from the Office of the Chief Coroner of Ontario that shed some light on this. None of this was reported in the media, we think likely because there was a movement at the time not to publicize suicide, because doing so was thought to possibly generate suicidal ideation in others. Cantillon attempted suicide on March 25, 1974, by sitting in his car behind a commercial building and running the engine with a hose attached to his tailpipe into his window. A citizen saw what was going on and summoned the police, who intervened. So this attempt failed. The next one did not. On May 21, 1974, Cantillon went to a location near the Old Mill TTC station in Toronto and lay down across the train tracks as a train was approaching. He was decapitated by the impact, leaving this world in a gruesome fashion suitable for the despicable acts he had committed on his victims. No more details are available. The only known witness was the driver of the subway train that hit him. Cantillon's family published a very small death notice in the paper, saying he was loved and would be missed. and a second notice on the anniversary of his death that said, Cantillon, Bruce Charles, in loving memory of a dear son and brother who passed away July 21, 1974. Loved too much ever to be forgotten. Mom, Dad, and brother G. After the case solve announcement, the Leroux family, presumably Yvonne's siblings, issued a family statement on November 15, 2023. Here it is in its entirety. Yvonne is far from forgotten, and this has affected our family through many generations. The case has remained a focus of attention in family gatherings and beyond, and has brought experiences that we would not wish on anyone. Unfortunately, this news came late as many of our family members have recently passed. For over half a century, our family has wondered. Getting some answers will never change what happened or bring her back. We hope that more funding will become available for new advancements in DNA genealogy so that more grieving families can have some form of clarity. We ask that you please respect our family's privacy at this time. After 51 years, Yvonne's case is closed thanks to investigative genetic genealogy. If you are one of the bad guys, they are coming for you. Thank you so much to Detective Sergeant Jonathan Nauman of the York Regional Police and Katie Crossman, a genealogist with the Toronto Police Services, for speaking with me about Yvonne's case. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to dnaidpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.